Hello and welcome to This Week in Law. I'm Denise Howell and we've got an amazing show for you this week. We've got Siva and Sita, namely Siva Vaidhyanathan and Nina Paley, the independent filmmaker and animator and cartoonist who made Sita Sings the Blues and all kinds of other wonderful creative works. We're going to talk about free distribution of those kinds of works. We're going to talk about the googlization of everything, Siva's new book. Evan Brown's joining me from internetcases.com. We'll see you next on TWiL.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell. Episode 98, recorded February 11, 2011. Copyright Bought This House. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by mailroute.info. Businesses of every size use MailRoute. One user, 50,000 users. It doesn't matter. MailRoute will protect you from spam and viruses, simplify your life, and make your email usable again. Go to mailroute.info. And by Squarespace. Squarespace is the fast and easy way to publish a high-quality website or blog. For a free 14-day trial, go to squarespace.com/TWiL. Hi, folks. This is Denise Howell, and you've joined us for This Week in Law on a great week and a great day. My goodness, so much happening even as we come on the air to record the show. I think before we delve into our topics, we have to just give a salute and a shout out to Egypt and everything that's gone on there, and a farewell to Hosni Mubarak. Have you guys been watching all this go through this morning? Siva?
Yeah, I'm so thrilled. This is like 1989 all over again. It's let's just hope it stays as peaceful and as happy in the next few weeks. But you know, things can only get better in Egypt. I'm dancing on the roof right now.
This, by the way, is Siva Vaidhyanathan, a University of Virginia law professor, author, and currently author of The Googlization of Everything, which I've started reading and is a really fabulous book, Siva. I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you.
We'll obviously
Thank you.
talk more about it here on the show today. Also joining us is Nina Paley, a filmmaker, animator, cartoonist, and accomplished quilter. Hi, Nina.
No, I'm not an accomplished quilter. I've only been doing it for a few weeks.
Everyone
quilter. Right
now, go to Nina's site at blog.ninapaley.com. I think we need a dot in there in your lower third. And check out the beautiful pictures of the quilts Nina's been making. I'm so amazingly impressed. And, you know, I mean, you're such a talented person to begin with, as we can tell by your other works. But to see this all, you know, come through in some sort of different art than I'm used to seeing you work in, it's really neat. And it's really neat to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Yes.
I'm getting a weird tapping sound.
Uh-oh. We'll see if we can pin that down. Yes, so many listeners have been asking me to get Nina on the show, and I've been trying, but I think that I must have been caught in some sort of nefarious spam filter somewhere. But fortunately, last week, one of our panelists, Stefan Kinsella, who was friends with Nina, was able to intercede and get the email in past all the barriers, and lo and behold, we've got her this week, so I'm so happy about that.
Me
and
too.
Also joining us again is Evan Brown from Hinshaw and Culbertson in Chicago, and his wonderful blog about all things internet and law, internetcases.com.
Hey, Denise, how's it going? It's great to be here. So happy to be part of this conversation. It's going to be a wonderful time. So I'm really thrilled. Thank you.
Me too. So social media has played a huge role. Would anyone go so far to say that social media and the web has actually convinced Hosni Mubarak to step down? Or, you know, am I overstating that? What do you think, Evan?
Well, there's no doubt it's been an instrumental tool in all of this, and it's one of those examples where we shouldn't be so quick to say that social media is the thing that has caused it to happen, but it has clearly been a key instrumentality, you know, the thing which has permitted it, the mechanism, the means by which all of these networked type of communications have occurred, so that such disruptive, widespread change can happen, at least from the perspective of the outside observer sitting over here, from the comfort of an office in the United States, seems to have unfolded on a relatively long time frame. Now, with that said, one of the initial things I think of when I hear about Hosni Mubarak is how long he has been in office. I remember being in grade school reading about Hosni Mubarak in textbooks there. So, I guess the only qualifier I would make on what I just said about social media's impact on all of this is, has it really been a quick time frame for all of this? I think it's probably safe to say that the use of social media very likely has accelerated all of this stuff that we've seen, unfold in the last couple of weeks.
I think what's pretty interesting too is the pivotal roles that Twitter and Facebook have played in all of this, but not so much Google. What do you think, Siva?
Well, I would remind us all, though, that social media doesn't just mean Facebook and Twitter, or Orkut, or any number of things. Social media can mean flyers taped to a wall, can mean a knock on the door from a neighbor, can mean someone walking through a cafe, tapping you on the shoulder, saying, "Come on out to a demonstration." Social communication is really what helps give people the courage to take a stand, as long as they are convinced they're taking a stand in numbers. Whenever we look at any of these uprisings, whether it's 2011 or 1989 or 1948 or 1945, 1848, if you want to go way back, the French Revolution, in each of these cases, you see people use the tools that are available to them. And you see people reach a point at which their confidence in the numbers of supporters outweighs the fear that they have of the state. And I'm comfortable saying that Twitter and Facebook helped people assume that that number was getting to the right point. It would have been, it certainly would have been much easier to sort of feel the swell, the way that people used Facebook and Twitter in Egypt, and to a lesser degree in Tunisia. But let's remember a couple of other things. For about 4 days at the height of these demonstrations, no one could use either of these, and the demonstrations got bigger. So, I'm always a little bit concerned when we focus on the gee whiz tools, and especially we focus on the gee whiz tools that we here in America, those of us who are, connected and aren't embarrassed to be seen with these headsets on our heads, talk a lot about the, from almost a narcissistic point of view, that look, the stuff I use all day is freeing the world. That means that we don't always focus on the fact that, real life people put their lives on the line and took a huge leap of faith in their neighbors, faith in their neighbors who serve in the army, faith in their neighbors' willingness to take a bullet for them if it came down to it. There's so much drama in this that we have just begun to find out about, and in ensuing months, as more stories come out, we'll learn about more heroics. And I just think that as excited as we are about the fact that some of these technologies have allowed information to flow outside the realm of the state, what it really comes down to is a lot of human bravery and people using what's available to them. So when Twitter was available, people used Twitter. When it wasn't available, they used flyers. And so it's not like the tools do the same thing in the same way, but people did what it took to do the job. And ultimately, when the bullets started flying and the tanks started rolling through the square and hundreds of people died, Twitter and Facebook didn't save any lives either. It was there was a lot more going on there. So I've been one of those people who, since the 1990s, has welcomed the networking of the world, and I love the ways that people have devised tremendous ways to root around authoritarian governments all over. But we have a lot of work yet to do before we can actually be confident in that ability. The interesting thing about Egypt and Tunisia both is that neither one of those governments were insecure enough or paranoid enough to create a Chinese-level surveillance state through the internet. They basically let the private sector establish internet circuits and invited in a lot of companies that were facilitating commerce and social media without believing that these tools could be used against them, because they really thought, like, well, what's the chance of them ever being overthrown? Whereas if you look at a place like China, if you look at how Saudi Arabia manages the internet, the way that Burma manages the internet, the way that Cuba manages the internet, these are countries that know how to use the internet for their own purposes to help clamp down on people, as well as limit total access. I mean, the Chinese definitely have the most sophisticated view of it. Google's role in this was in some ways, I think, more important than Facebook or Twitter, only because it was a Google employee who really stepped forward to be a leader and risked his life and his firm's reputation to do this. But, you know, nothing technological that Google did made the difference. It just so happened that this is the sort of person who would want to work for Google and did. And I think that made a tremendous difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Nina, any thoughts on this before we start talking about our otherwise lined up agenda for today?
What Siva saed. He said it all.
Yeah.
This is why I'm a fan.
And he tied it in great with his book, too. The whole ceding over of control of the internet to third parties privately run.
Actually, I guess what I do want to say is my concern, of course, is that the United States is getting more and more draconian about our previously free internet with all of the domain seizures and shutdowns and things like that. So I'm just concerned that the U.S. is going more in a China-like direction.
Yes, that's something to keep an eye on, that we have been keeping an eye on here on the show, and it is a scary development. Siva, in your book, and I want to start talking about that because your book and your other works sort of set the stage for everything I wanted to talk about today, the framework for the whole discussion. And you do this great sort of invocation of the Genesis story at the beginning of your book. You know, in the beginning, there was the web, and it was dark and chaotic and unmanageable. And then there was Google, and instead of, I guess, blowing on the waters, Google indexed them, and it was good. And after all of that, you know, we have just more and more increasingly given a lot of control and trust to Google, which, you know, a lot of people would say that they've earned the trust. The control is sort of a scary thing. As I read through your book, I'm struck again and again by the fact that everything you're saying is commonsensical, that we should be skeptical and have a healthy degree of watching what is happening rather than just letting it happen to us and questioning what is happening. But at the same time, I'm struck by sort of our human need to believe in Camelot, that there is this shining city on the hill that does no evil and that really, you know, stands by what it says it's going to do and goes out and does good things. And I think that a lot of the trust that Google gets flows from that. You know, it's sort of like the election last year, that, you know, people really, really wanted to believe in this force for change and for good. And there was a lot of momentum that built up from that, and I think Google benefits from that kind of a glow as well. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely, and I don't doubt that Google's halo is going to shine bright for a few more years, and that's despite the fact that Google keeps running into some high friction situations, especially in Europe. Google Street View has been remarkably controversial in Europe. European regulators have been raising some very tough questions about the methods that Google uses to in ranking and perhaps favoring either its own content or content it has partnerships with, and basically they want to get under the hood and see how Google works to make sure that Google's not tricking anybody. Now, you know, we like to think Google would never do that, and I actually have no reason to believe that Google would do that in 2011. But one of the things I want people to do when they think about Google, and the reason I wrote this book, is that we should never believe that the Google of 2020 is the same as the Google of 2010, or for that matter, 2000. And we know that even between 2000 and 2010, Google changed immensely in its goals and its habits and its policies, and it got tremendously successful with doing very little damage and a whole lot of good for our lives. But companies do ultimately have to answer to their shareholders, to the imperatives of their natures, and that means there will be more friction points, more times in which Google is going to have to choose between the interests of you and me and the interests of its stockholders. And right now, it's been making so much money that it hasn't had to make that choice. But that's not going to go on forever.
Do you think that there's been a failure of government and our legal system at some level in allowing Google to maintain this degree of pervasiveness and control?
Yeah, but I'd put it a little differently. I would say that Google has masterfully taken advantage of the legal, regulatory, and political moment of its gestation, right? It's about to hit adolescence, or maybe of its childhood, right? It's just turned 12, right? Its voice is about to change. So, so you have this situation where, of course, here I'm assuming it's masculine. I don't know, but the moment in which it arose was one in which we've become, after 30 years of having it hammered into us, deeply skeptical about the role of the state to manage important things in our lives. And of course, there are good reasons for that, and some not so good reasons for that fundamental belief. But it's also come at a time when the very notion of invoking antitrust law early and vigilantly it has been out of fashion within the courts, within the legal academy, for basically since Robert Bork wrote important articles in the late 70s. It's been the case, and only now are we finding, so the Microsoft case being a blip along the way, only now are we finding that with the new folks in the Justice Department, in the FTC, who've come in the last 2 years, that there's a new willingness to look at factors besides, for instance, consumer price, when judging the role of a company like this in competition. And so Google's having to be a big part of that conversation, both in the U.S. and Europe. I think for good reason, Google's much more concerned about its position in Europe in a regulatory sense and a legal sense than it is in the U.S. So I don't think that Google's necessarily moved the levers of the state, but I do think that Google, because it's built and run by engineers, because it's got this great entrepreneurial success story, the kind of which the President of the United States invokes during the State of the Union, those sorts of things have made it sort of capture a long zeitgeist, a 20, 30-year zeitgeist, in which this is how we do it in America, and this is how we can get good things without getting the state involved. What's ignored in that whole story is the extent to which the government made Google happen, right? It was a National Science Foundation research grant that created the PageRank algorithm, or that made the PageRank algorithm possible. Larry Page was working on that grant when he came up with the algorithm. It was Stanford University's massively federally funded research system that attracted people like Page and Brin to Stanford in the first place, right? Stanford is a major hub in defense spending and technological research. On top of all that, Google, of course, built its fortune on the internet itself, which was birthed out of the Defense Department in the first place, and managed by the Commerce Department. So, to imagine, one of the important things I think we have to do when we look at the sort of regulatory story of companies like Google is understand the extent to which everything at every step is tied up with rules, regulations, and state influence, from copyright to antitrust to the lack of sales tax for internet-only vendors. I mean, at every step you get a policy choice that helps make something like Google possible.
In the EU, they don't seem to have any problem thinking about Google in terms of antitrust. I think, and tell me if you buy into this, because it just was sort of occurring to me as you were speaking, that in the U.S. it might be more difficult for us to get our arms around thinking about Google that way, because they're not the kind of entity, and they're not in the kind of business that our government has traditionally pursued for antitrust violations. It's difficult to think of search in that term because there are opportunities for competition out there, and there are competitors, even though Google is the obviously the 800-pound gorilla in that world. And as far as all of Google's other sort of spider-like adjunct services, they're free, and I think that probably is a complicating factor. And again, there are competitors for every other service that Google offers, but when you bundle them all together, you get something that begins to look like something that you would want to investigate and possibly control and regulate. Do you agree that it's sort of an unconventional square peg in our round antitrust hole here in the U.S.?
I totally agree with your analysis. I think that's the reason that sort of intellectually, especially to most of us, it seems counterintuitive. And Google, of course, takes this position publicly. Its officers, whenever put in a position to talk about competition or antitrust, will say things like, well, of course, we're just our competition is just one click away, and we started and rose so quickly, and who's to say the next firm won't start and rise so quickly? Ignoring a couple of different things, and this is how I would sort of respond to that story and the description you've just laid out. One, focusing on the price that you and I pay is actually pretty irrelevant to the question. Largely because we're not Google's customers. We are Google's product. So the cattle are never plaintiffs in an antitrust suit against a slaughterhouse. To be gruesome about it, right? Wow. But what really matters is the price that advertisers are paying to be involved in the Google system, and the extent to which advertisers really do have a choice when it comes to buying ads. And so in that sense, it's not just that Bing is now an important and perhaps growing part of the search choices that users make, but the real question is, to what extent do companies that buy ads trust Bing to position those ads as well as Google does? And for that reason, Facebook's actually a much more important competitor in that market right now than Microsoft is. So that's one thing. The second thing about this notion that competition is just a click away, the array of services that Google offers and the ways in which Google can create, you might call them loss leaders, throwaway projects, experimental projects. There's actually a term within antitrust that sort of escapes me, but basically, projects like the Books project, projects like Gmail, which make no money for Google, only costs money, right? Those sorts of things are enabled by Google's remarkably dominant position within web advertising, and now that it bought DoubleClick, even a larger role. And it's not true that competition is a click away, because the reason that Google can do search like it does, the reason that search results show up within a fraction of a second, the reason that it has redundancy in its servers to host all this indexed material, is that it has billions of dollars of sunken infrastructure that it built up in the early part of the decade of the aughts, when bandwidth was getting super cheap and server space was getting super cheap, and Google was able to buy up all the surplus servers of all those .com companies that went under, and sunk it all in the ground, and bought air conditioners and bought solar panels, and strung it all with fiber optic cable. And they were able to do this at a time when everything was cheap, and to do that now for a new company would just be virtually impossible. You have to somehow raise many billions of dollars, not just millions of dollars, to create that infrastructure. Now, you can create the best code in the world. 8 guys working 30 nights in a row can create amazing code. That's not the challenge necessarily. The challenge is the metal and the glass and the and those big air conditioners. That's what's often ignored when we think about these allegedly light companies. But Google is actually a huge footprint, and it's not so easy to displace. To displace it is going to take decades, and it's going to be an indication more of the fact that both users and thus advertisers have shifted information gathering habits. And that might occur because of the iPhone, and that might occur because of Facebook, but it might occur because of some medium or interface that we can't even imagine right now. In fact, if you and I think it up, we can probably make lots of money, but we may not be the ones to do that.
No, but we'll sure talk about it when it happens.
Right, exactly. We'll have lots of strong and well-informed opinions about the brilliant things that other people do.
Well, what sort of well-informed opinions should we have? Your book makes the point that we should, not just sort of let this happen to us. We should watch and be careful. And as you make a good analogy early on to the automobile industry, that, yes, of course, there are amazing benefits to automobile and air transportation, amazing benefits to these systems, but the systems unchecked and out of control can be dangerous to ourselves and the environment, and in ways that Google could never be, and you make that point too. So what do we do to make sure that we don't let Google get out of control? What can we do?
Yeah. Specifically, it means paying a lot of attention to the extent to which we make our judgments based on what is good for Google and what Google does. So, for instance, if we're choosing where to read news and we're using a simple Google search to find out the latest breaking news on, say, Egypt, or on some congressman, getting in a failed extramarital affair and having to resign, right? Whenever you do that Google search, you have to understand, first of all, that the first few links are likely to be low-quality sources that just know how to play the search engine optimization game. And that includes Huffington Post, right? So there's a reason Huffington Post is so dominant in our lives, and it's not just because Alec Baldwin blogs there. It's because they figured out long ago that if you show up high in Google searches, especially for celebrity news or diet news or health news, you're going to attract more readers, and they're going to make it a habit in their lives, right? But that may not be the best source of information. But Huffington knows how to play the Google game. Huffington bends its content to satisfy the algorithms rather than satisfy our needs as citizens or as consumers. And that's not to take away from the things that I think Huffington does well, even though I have many bigger problems with it. We can talk about some other time. But you have to ask yourself, are the top 3 hits really where I want to go? Maybe I should click on page 2 once in a while, because Google doesn't always know the right answer. And so that's one simple way of checking yourself to make sure your judgments about the world are not being Googleized, and making sure that you're not feeding the beast, right? Because it's that habit of clicking on the first 3 links, which tend to be those sites that have the best optimizers on staff or on contract, that end up dominating the Google world and the web world.
That's funny. This is actually influencing artists, because as an artist, I am prone, all artists are prone to approval seeking, and of course we want to know how many people are looking at our sites and how many, what results come up when we type in our work and things like that. And it does seem possible that I'm sure artists are tempted to cater their work to how many Google results they're going to get for it, that could be more important to them than what they're actually doing. I mean, I've certainly felt that tug. I mean, not hard enough to actually do it, but it's there.
Well, I definitely want to get next into how you have distributed your work, Nina, and how you are getting the word out about it. Before we go there, I just want to make sure, Evan, do you have any final thoughts on the Google discussion?
The one thing that came to my mind in all of that, in what Siva was saying there about matching up Huffington Post and it playing the Google game and matching that instead of what maybe in a general sense of saying is the public interest, is it seems like we should, as responsible people, have a close eye on how much Google's efforts and the way it tweaks its algorithms, et cetera, matches up with the public interest, so that it's not necessarily two different things that we're talking about when we're talking about writing for a search engine and writing to meet the public interest and the appetite, the epistemic knowledge or epistemic hunger that the consuming public may have on all of these things. That's something that rose to my mind in all of this discussion.
Very good.
Okay, so Nina, let's go where you were going a moment ago. About a couple of years ago, you made a film called Sita Sings the Blues. And you decided, and just for anyone who hasn't seen it, first of all, go see it or, find it on the web. It's easy to find. Use Google or your other favorite search engine of choice. And it will be right there. It is, I was trying to sum it up quickly for myself. If the Ricky Gervais panel added Betty Boop and went to India, it would sort of begin to capture your film. But it's much more than that. And it's a wonderful and charming and compelling story taken from, now again, I'm going to butcher the name of the work that inspired you here, so you better say it for me.
Ramayana.
The Ramayana. And told from Sita instead of Rama's point of view. Which I take it is not the conventional way to tell that story.
Yeah, although there are lots of Sitayanas. I mean, that's by no means a new thing. I think I stumbled into this strange situation where I started the film in 2002. I had a blog. I wrote about my process, and a lot of people seem to think like, oh my gosh, this is like a groundbreaking thing. There's the Ramayana from Sita's point of view. Mm-hmm. It's not. I never made any claims that it was. I think what was groundbreaking was just, making a feature film by myself, blogging about it, and the way the technology had changed to make that possible. I actually published posted the early clips for that film as QuickTime movies. There was no YouTube. I mean, it's hard to even remember. Just a few years ago, there was no YouTube, and I posted them as little QuickTime things for my friends. I didn't think people were going to find my blog. What ended up happening was somebody found the blog, and who wasn't someone I already knew. They told someone else, and then boing boing. Which at the time was like a really big deal, blogged about it, and then my site was shut down from all the traffic. And then I was known, just like that, before even YouTube. I had to pay for it. Hosting was expensive.
Well, that's going to be a great lead into one of our sponsors for the show in just a minute here. But let's talk a bit more about your movie first. So you decided, I take it early on, that you weren't going to go the traditional independent filmmaker route as far as just distributing your film. You were going to, as much as you possibly could, freely license it and let people do with it what they would for both commercial and non-commercial purposes.
I didn't actually decide that early on.
Oh, okay. Well, take us through that process.
Yeah, so when I started working on the film, I had never made a feature film before, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted to make this film. It had to be this specific thing. So I went ahead and made it. Early on, I knew that the provenance of the songs was probably going to be problematic, and so I contacted the EFF. They put me in touch with the Glushko Samuelson Intellectual Property Law Clinic of American University, which has a much too long name, but was incredibly helpful. And so I had people researching the issues around the songs from the very beginning.
Right, because you use a bunch of Annette Hanshaw's music as the blues component of Sita Sings the Blues.
Yes, and those were all recorded in the late 1920s. So they all would be in public domain had Congress not continually retroactively been extending copyright terms. So when these songs were made, there was no contract. They were made with the understanding that they were going to be public domain by the 1980s at the very latest, and probably much sooner than that, probably in the 1950s.
Right. But so you had a couple of problems. You wanted to use these particular songs because they were important to the tone of your story.
Yeah, they have historical significance. They actually support the thesis of the story. It's a fiction film, but it has the same points to make that a documentary would make, and those points can't be made by contrived fake culture. They're actually referring to real cultural works.
Right. So you were stuck with this conundrum that A, you wanted to make the film and use this music that it was going to be difficult to obtain the rights to, and B, you wanted to distribute the film freely. So tell us how you got through those issues.
Right. Well, when I started, I wasn't thinking I would be distributing the film freely. It took several years to make the film, really 3 years of production. So when I started, which was 2005, the independent film business was totally different. And there were these little independent films that would get these $1 million deals with distributors. And it's just like, you make an independent film and you sell it to a distributor. And if necessary, the distributor clears the rights. That there were so many stories of little films doing that. So I just bumbled along and was like, all right, well, I'm going to make the film, and if it's a problem, the distributor will clear the rights, and then it'll have normal distribution. What happened was the film industry changed dramatically. All these little independent distributors, which I don't even know if you can remember a few years ago, they were really hot. It was like so hip to be a little film distributor. And they all went belly up right before my film was done and hit festivals. So it had this festival premiere, but instead of offering, $1 million contracts, they were offering $10,000 contracts, which was, not enough to justify this. And then there was the fact that I hadn't cleared the songs yet. I had done a lot of research, but I had not actually gone through that clearance process. The process is so time-consuming and expensive, and the rights holders, who I had to find out who they were, would not return my phone calls. They will not talk to little people. They will only talk to lawyers and professional music supervisors. So they
sometimes they'll talk to lawyers. They won't always talk to them.
Yeah. So what's not acknowledged as a transaction cost. People say like, oh, you just asked for permission. That's the right thing to do. Well, I tried, and they wouldn't return my calls. So I had to start spending money in order to talk to them. And of course, once the lawyer that I paid for contacted them, the first thing they said is, we're not going to talk to you unless you pay us $500 per song and sign this thing promising you're not going to make any money. So it cost $500. It cost, whatever, like how many? $5,000 to talk to them. And this is for like a ultra low budget film, and I was broke. I was out of money. But anyway, I did all this stuff. I borrowed money. So the film was technically illegal while it was doing its festival run. And that was actually a good thing for me because that gave me time. No distributor could take it. They gave me time to talk to other filmmakers and learn more about what was really happening to good independent films. And what I learned was that these beautiful films people were making, they had signed deals with distributors. And the result of that was that their films couldn't be seen because what independent distributors were doing was, first thing, they would pull it out of film festivals because they wanted to get money for every use of the film. And they were basically blocking access more than they were granting it. They would have art house openings in a city or two that would usually last a weekend. Then they couldn't afford to promote the film anymore, so they wouldn't be able to keep having it in theaters. There weren't enough people going to see it to justify its continued taking up space in cinemas. They would release a DVD, but of course they wouldn't have the budget to advertise the DVD, so nobody would know about the DVD. And you had to go through that distributor in order to get the DVD. So these films were like locked into a kind of obscurity by the distributors. And some filmmakers talked to me quietly and said, I really hope somebody pirates this film because unless somebody pirates it, it's not going to be seen. They did not like being obscure. So, I had this time to hear that and learn about that that I wouldn't have had if a distributor had picked it up. So in a way, the difficulty I had in licensing the songs was a gift. Ultimately, I did borrow a lot of money, hire a new rights clearance house, hemorrhaged money, whatever, was in debt, but legally cleared all of the songs through what's called a step deal. And at that point, I could legally share my film for free. I wanted to free it much sooner than that, but it was illegal for me to allow people to share my film for free. That was horrendous. There was a lot of nausea that year. Like, wow, I can't even give someone a hard drive with this film on it legally, because that's considered stealing, and I could be, sued for millions and millions of dollars, and go to jail. I realized, and go to jail for non-commercial use of these things. So it was both the experience with the just insanity of the copyright system, and talking to all those filmmakers who actually would have found piracy beneficial, that made me decide to legally and clearly free the film, not have sharing of the film be something relegated to people who are willing to break the law, but to do it above the board and say, hey, everybody, please share the film, because that's going to benefit me.
Well, the good news is it seems to have finally worked out that you've jumped through all those hurdles and the film is out there and getting amazing distribution and visibility because you opted to make it free. But you had to beg, borrow, and hopefully not steal a great deal of money to accomplish being able to give the film away for free. In a minute, I want to talk about how that has worked out for you as an artist from an economic standpoint, how that's played out for you, the decision to make it free. But before we get to that, I do want to go back to the point you were making earlier about the costs of web hosting and point out that if Squarespace had been around those years ago when you had been working on the film, it would have been an excellent place to host your blog. Because one of the great things about Squarespace is that the bandwidth comes right along for the ride for your $12 or so a month that you pay for their basic subscription purchase. But the bandwidth infrastructure is such that a site like Boing Boing can't take you down. A site like Twit can't take you down. Or it would be very, very difficult to do because they spread their bandwidth over a cloud architecture system for speed and site stability, which just means everything works. The site's not going to go down no matter who links to it. And it's just wonderful and seamless. So we're really excited that Squarespace is a sponsor of this show. It's the fast and easy way to publish a high-quality website or blog. It has a wonderfully intuitive UI for creating and managing a website or blog. And I've never suggested specifically that people should do this, but since I just did it for someone, one great thing you can do with Squarespace, because they give you this 14-day free trial, is you can give someone a site as a gift, which I just did for a friend of mine. You guys might not think about this, but as we start to get older, I know it's hard to imagine, but little things start to happen, like our hair starts to get gray. And a good friend of mine with long, lustrous, dark hair that in recent years she has assisted in keeping that way as she has begun to get a little bit older, has decided to let her long, lustrous, dark hair become salt and pepper, long, lustrous hair. And she wants to document that process sort of a la the woman who did the Salon blog with Julia Child and had a movie made about her blog a while later. And so, to be able to kick her off with this, I made her a Squarespace site in about half an hour. And she's so thrilled with it and so grateful that, I would point you to it, but we haven't actually posted anything there yet. So it just highlights how easy to use Squarespace is. You can just sort of dash off a wonderful site for someone with all of the features they need. And yet it's also very full-featured for professional sites. If you go to their examples page, you will see everything across the board. And the one unifying feature is they all look and function great. There are hundreds of design templates to choose from, and you can customize any of the designs to fit your needs. The all-inclusive service includes several modules to build your site. There's a blog module that includes import and export support for WordPress, Blogger, Movable Type, and TypePad. Export means data portability, of course. That means you can, if you decide for some reason to leave Squarespace, and I don't know why you would, easily get your data out just as easily as you could put it in. There are forums that you can add. There's a form builder, Flickr photo display, all kinds of widgets that you can put into your blog to help make it interact with other sites. It has permission access handling. There's tracking and SEO built right in. Again, it's really hard to bring these sites down because of the way they use cloud architecture on the back end. There's an innovative drag-and-drop AJAX interface, an iPhone app, which is really important to my friend that I gave the blog to. She wants to be able to update on the go and really use this as a journal. So that's going to make it much easier for her. And she also uses an iPad. And they just recently, I know that people were waiting with bated breath for this. Squarespace has recently released their iPad app. So that's good to go too. So for a 14-day free trial, go to squarespace.com, sign yourself up for a free account, make your site for yourself, or give it as a gift. It's a great gift. There's no credit card needed. Just try it out, build your site, and go to squarespace.com/TWiL, TWiL, when you do. Thanks so much, Squarespace, for your support. All right, Nina, so let's talk about what happened once you jumped through the hurdles, spent the money. It was, what, roughly $70,000 you had to spend just to make sure that you were on the up and up with the film?
Yes.
And then you put it out there. And you gave folks instructions, and in fact, I'm going to interject this as our resource of the week this week. If you go to Nina's page let me get the proper URL for you here. It is, well, it's kind of long, but it's in our discussion points at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/98. It's the restrictions page relating to the film. You have
go to
cetasingstheblues.com. cetasingstheblues.com/restrictions. Is that it?
Yeah, or it's either /restrictions or /license. If you click on the license tab, it'll take you to that. It's our total compliance chart.
Yes.
Go
ahead. Why don't you explain it for folks?
So I have a step deal, and what that means is I have to keep track of how many copies are sold. Not promotional copies. Promotional copies customarily are given away. So my strategy is to give away promotional copies. However, I can't really control what people do with those promotional copies. Anybody can distribute the film. It's an audience-distributed film. So I do have to disclose to my distributors the payments that they have to make to these licensors. So I made a chart, and anyone is welcome to distribute DVDs. You can distribute one, you can distribute thousands, but you just have to send checks according to the chart to Warner Chappell and Sony, and I think there's about 10 of them, and we break it all down. And, by all means, send a check for 11 cents to, I don't even know who gets 11 cents, but look at the chart. We would really love people to do that because we really want to make this legitimate.
And I just love the whole notion that someone would actually write the check and send it off. Don't you think that these rights holders are going to receive these checks from time to time from people who are selling your film and just look at them and go, huh? There's no context.
Actually, they even went, when questioncopyright.org and I, who published our DVD, sent them our big royalty checks for these songs because we have to send them for every 5,000 copies sold. And even then, they didn't know what was going on. All of this work, like all of this negotiation, all of the cost of getting the lawyers, and we sent them checks, and even still, they're like, what's this for? It's so infuriating. Like, they don't even know. They don't even know.
It probably has the terrible effect of making them think, what is this? And let's have our lawyers look at it, and it's probably not enough.
Oh, no, it costs them more to keep track of this stuff than they are getting from it. It's an absurd system. But whatever, it's the law, so, got to obey the law. I just happen to be talking about how the law actually works as I go along. The law is really messed up.
Right. So you do rely heavily on Google and other search to point people toward your film and spread it around. Discuss that for a minute and how it has worked for you commercially.
Well, the more a cultural work is shared, the more value it has as a cultural work. A lot of people aren't so interested in value or cultural value as they are in money, which is related to price. What I've found is that the more people share the film for free, the more they want to buy DVDs. In fact, I released the film for free in, I think, March of 2009, and I didn't have a DVD for sale. I just wanted it out in the world, so it's just get it out there. But then all these people were begging me for a DVD. And this goes totally against what the MPAA says, which is that if people see the film, they won't buy the DVD. I found the more they see the film, the more they want to buy the DVD. So I scrambled, took 2 months, made a nice DVD package, and I sell that. And I get money from DVD sales, even though nobody has to pay for that DVD. I also have the Sita Sings the Blues merchandise empire, which is sitasingstheblues.com/store.html. And, you know, people buy merch. When people are fans, when they become fans of art, they actually want to support the artist, and selling merch gives them a way to do so. A donate button also gives them a way to do so. And my very favorite transactions are just when somebody downloads the film and then, you know, wants to send me some money. I welcome money. Money is great.
Right. And you're doing a special sort of director's edition DVD.
No, it's not. Oh, that one, right?
Yeah.
There's an artist edition, right?
Artist edition.
The content on all the DVDs is exactly the same, and you can download that content for free on archive.org. It's all up there. But speculating that the value of the DVD was in the package, was in the physical embodiment of it, I myself did 2 editions. Well, one is the Question Copyright.org edition, but then there's the artist edition, and there people say, what's the difference between, you know, the $20 edition and the $100 edition, and the difference is $80. That's the difference.
Got it.
And I've sold plenty of artist editions. I mean, the artist edition also is in a larger, fancier package. It's numbered, it's signed, you know, has a certificate of authenticity. But that's it. The DVD data is the same. And that was just another way for people who really want to support me and support the project to do so, and then get a token, you know, a special thing that costs more. This is how the art world works, you know. People make prints, signed, numbered, limited edition. Oh, that's $10,000, you know. It doesn't make any sense, but I figured I'd try it. Right.
So, Siva, one of the things I think that Nina has found, she used Creative Commons, the attribution share-alike license for the film. And Nina, correct me if I'm wrong, but you haven't been wildly overwhelmed with positive feelings about using Creative Commons, and have since moved on to, for your comic, Mimi and Eunice, the Copy Heart, which we can talk about in a minute, but I want to stay on Creative Commons and whether it's broken or not. So that's my my question to...
That's a great topic.
Yeah, to Siva. We have a story in the discussion points by Max Cho in the Yale Technology and Law and Technology Journal, called Copyright in a Free World, where he basically posits that we should shift. You know, a lot of people posit a lot of things about copyright and reforming it. His suggestion is that our problems with copyright would be solved if content defaulted into being available for non-commercial reproduction use with attribution. But he goes through a long explanation of why Creative Commons is perhaps too cumbersome and complex to really solve the problems that it was intended to.
I did want to clarify one thing, which is that I still do use the share-alike license. It's not like Copy Heart. It's a substitute for a legal license. When a legal license is appropriate, it's the share-alike license.
Right.
It's just that a lot of people have no idea what these licenses mean. And it's like, how do you reach them? How do you encourage copying when they're so confused by all these different licenses?
I think it's working fairly well. I mean, certainly better than things worked before it. Now, I would agree that it can be daunting to the uninitiated. And one of the goals in the early days of Creative Commons was to create a user-friendly, non-lawyer sort of interface. And they might have missed their mark. But they also, in the early days, had in mind more levels of license than people probably need or want in a large sense. Like the number of boxes on the cereal shelf may actually be too many. I'm not involved in any of the day-to-day goings on at Creative Commons, so I can't speak to which of the licenses are more successful than others. One thing we do know anecdotally, and I think they've shown it at Creative Commons, is that the attribution right is actually really important to people, much more important to people than they thought day one. And it really shouldn't surprise us in retrospect. After hearing Nina's story, for instance, and talking to enough artists, often what's most frustrating about copyright as it is in law is that attribution rights actually mean very little in most in real copyright. And so by creating a license-based requirement that one acknowledge and attribute, it gives creators a right they didn't have automatically by default in law, which is really helpful. The other big advantage of Creative Commons, I think it gets underestimated, is the metadata power of it. The fact that you can do a search of Creative Commons content using particular techniques and engines, or using Flickr, for instance, and that's tremendously helpful for bloggers, for instance, who want to put up illustrations and images that make their point, and there are enough Creative Commons licensed materials on Flickr that you can find a picture of almost anything to make your point. And I think that's, if there's one area on the use side where Creative Commons has really succeeded, it's in that metadata attached to images. Right. Obviously, it would be great if more musicians would think about it and move with it. Very few authors dealing with major publishers are in a strong bargaining position to demand Creative Commons rights and further use of their materials. And so there are lots of ways in which Creative Commons has not loosened up the copyright world yet. But I'd be really interested to hear.
I really have to interject here.
Story. Yeah, please do.
Okay, thanks. One thing is that this attribution issue, there's a real problem with enforcing there's a real problem with copyright law underneath all of this. Attribution is granted by the community. And I've found with Sita Sings the Blues that the best way to ensure my attribution is to free the work. Because if you have an unfree work, that's much easier to hijack the attribution. The more obscure it is, the easier it is to lie about it. So just as having a public encryption key allows encryption to work, keeping your published art genuinely published means that you're never even going to have to go legal on somebody if they lie. If somebody lies about who created the work, they're going to be damaging their own reputation. And it's the freer the work is that allows that to happen. So yeah, artists are concerned about attribution, but I really think that making a legal threat about being attributed that's not the best way to achieve that. The best way to achieve proper attribution is to free your work.
Right, and I see that as making a lot of sense too, because there's really no financial incentive to go out and file a lawsuit just so that the judge will enter an order saying thou shalt attribute the author of this work. Why would anybody spend their resources going to court over that point? So that's why I see that attribution and all of this, and the legal aspect of it is not the panacea that one might imagine it to be.
Right, and then there's the problem that copyright law itself is so rife with problems. And granted, in the situation I'm in now, I'm very grateful for Creative Commons. I'm very grateful that they have done all the legal work to make these legally binding licenses, because I'm kind of, when copyright happens by default, that's what you have to do. But I do have this concern that I'm validating copyright law every time I rely on a license. I don't want to be licensing my stuff. I don't want my stuff copyrighted by default. I want my stuff to be free by default. Mm-hmm. So, getting too rah-rah about licenses is problematic, no matter how good the licenses are, even share-alike.
Right. Well, that's what Max suggested in his journal article. And I wanted to ask Evan, do you think we're at all within decades or dozens of decades of having copyright shift to such an extent that a default would be that the work would be available freely available unless you opted into some kind of and had to pay a fee, presumably, for some kind of more extensive protections?
It's one of those situations where at a fundamental level, for many of us, it would make a lot of sense for that to be the case. The two big weighty obstacles that I see to that are, one, the corporate interests. The shorthand way of saying that would be Walt Disney's lobbying power. And the other big obstacle I would see to that is the Constitution. I'm not sure that we can read into the Constitution without some resistance the idea that one has to take an affirmative step to step into the scope of protection that the Constitution provides automatically.
If I may,
Sure.
So before the 1976 revisions, copyright did not happen by default. It was actually the 76 revisions that made the mere act of fixation carry the power of copyright. So we actually did have the default that I think many of us, certainly Nina and I, would wish for before the 1976 revisions. You had to opt into the system to get covered. Two things prevent undoing that. Obviously, the fact that all the big corporate lobbyists who represent any copyright industry in the world would speak out against that as number one if that were proposed. And Lawrence Lessig has proposed this very thing, right, changing this default. The other thing, the big hang-up, is the Berne Convention, which and the TRIPS agreement, which international multilateral agreements to help harmonize, for which is a horrible word, international copyright, basically prohibits the use of what are known as formalities, which would mean a fee or an application to opt into the copyright system, which is what we had before 76. So if we were to undo that system, and I would love it if we could, we would have to get over, obviously, the political challenge, which I'm not going to argue by fiat that that's impossible, but let's remember that that's what it would take, a real political movement to do it. And secondly, we would have to get around the fact that we would be violating international law. Not that the United States has a problem violating international law in all sorts of other areas, but it just so happens this is one of those areas where the United States is a leader in creating the international law that so many of us oppose. Now, that said, Creative Commons is necessary because until we get that point where the political movement can actually overcome those two obstacles, we got to have something to let people manage through this crazy system. And the reason Creative Commons works as well as it does and has been such a help to so many people is that in the absence of it, you just get more absurdity and you just get more gum in the system, and you don't have an easy and simple way to demand attribution rights, among many other things. You don't have an easy and simple way to tell people, go ahead and remix my stuff, and you're not going to hear from my lawyer. I mean, that's a beautifully liberating thing. We just don't have a system like that in the wake of the 76 revisions. And so really the efforts should be two-pronged. One, creating and building that political movement. And so the question, I think, that, and this is, I think, speaks exactly to what Nina's misgivings are, and I think they're legitimate and worth examining. While we are trying to do that first part, launch a political movement to fundamentally alter the defaults of copyright, does having a system that makes the world a little bit more workable, a little bit less absurd along the way, work for or against that effort? At this point, I'm not sure it really works against that effort, but I think Nina could be right.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like I say, the proof's in the pudding. I use the share-alike license. I use Creative Commons share-alike license. At the same time, I'm just putting a little heart on my stuff saying, please copy this. But do you have 1 minute for a song about this?
Of course.
Okay. This is for an upcoming Minute Meme. Minute Memes are a project I'm doing with questioncopyright.org. They're little cartoons about all these copyright-related issues. Always give credit where credit is due. If you didn't write it, don't say it's by you. Just copy the credit along with the work, or else you'll come off as an ignorant jerk. Always give credit where credit belongs. We know that you didn't write Beethoven's songs. Pretending you did makes you look like a fool. Unless you're Beethoven, in that case it's cool. A transparent system makes cheating unwise. The simplest web search exposes your lies. No one wants their reputation besmirched, which happens to liars when they are web searched. Proper citation will make you a star. It shows that you know that we know who you are. Plagiarization will only harm you. So always give credit where credit is due.
Nina Paley, ladies and gentlemen. Awesome.
This is definitely the best show, right? The most musical show you've done in a long time.
Definitely.
It's for Copyright the Musical.
Your next film, hopefully. We got a good comment in IRC here, and I neglected to mention at the beginning of the show that we do have live IRC that goes along with the show as we record at irc.twit.tv or #twit live in your favorite IRC client. And this is from Fopo Gijo in the IRC, who says he or she actually prefers the by default copyright operation because it makes open source licenses harder if you have to actively copyright everything. Big corporations would have no problem copywriting more and more, and I guess the corollary to that is that smaller, more independent people would maybe let the copywriting of things go when actually that's what they intended or desired to do. Any thoughts on that, Siva?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. I don't think it's a strong enough point to say that we shouldn't have some sort of formality and some sort of default. But the reason that Richard Stallman wrote the general public license the way he did was he was very much concerned about that very notion that if you release code in the public domain, it is merely in the public domain without a license attached, restricting how it can be used. It can be gathered up by a commercial entity, folded into a much larger project, and essentially commercialized and privatized. And he didn't want that to happen to his code, and obviously many other people working in free and open source software are concerned about that very same phenomenon. So I get that, and so when Lawrence Lessig and the people who helped him develop the licenses for Creative Commons were working from the template of Stallman's assumptions, they were, of course, working in this very environment, one in which release, I mean, at first, actually, I think there was, and I'm not sure if there still is, one of the licenses that simply allows things to be released in the public domain, and I don't think anybody picked it, at least in the first few years, for this very reason. The notion that your work would then end up, as part of a Disney production, or as part of, a Puff Daddy single was not without any attribution, and thus at that point it becomes an element of a creative work and possibly not shared beyond that, was a pretty frightful prospect to a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned commercialization and privatization. The problem is privatization. One of the problems, again, with Creative Commons is that the brand of Creative Commons has become associated primarily with non-commercial licenses, which are their most popular licenses. And I'm pro-commerce. Go for it. Commerce is good. And these non-commercial licenses primarily harm small artists because it's the small artists that can't afford to spend the time or potentially the money to go through the permissions process for everything that they build on. And artists build on everything. That's how it works. It really needs to be free. So by using non-commercial licenses, people create a situation where the large corporations once again have an advantage. In fact, large corporations like non-commercial licenses because they love having a commercial monopoly. The last thing they want is some small independent entity competing with them commercially. So, I just want to make it really clear that this whole bias against commercial activity is, I think, pretty destructive. I think it's especially destructive to artists. I think everybody deserves to make a living from their work, and small entities especially.
But let's remember that that's not a Creative Commons management problem. That's simply a factor of, and I've been guilty of this too, the people who invoke the license often click on non-commercial because it feels like a good idea up front, right. And they don't want their stuff, used and abused by someone who's making money free riding on their work without them knowing about it or without permission. And that's an understandable position. So the effects that you're seeing are because of content creators who don't examine that very phenomenon that you're discussing. And I had this problem with a book collection that a university press was putting together, and most of the contributors had insisted on a non-commercial Creative Commons license, and the publisher had agreed to some sort of Creative Commons license but did not want a non-commercial, largely because that would restrict the ways that the publisher could sell portions of that book through some of the library licensing schemes down the line, the ways that it could work with Amazon and so forth. There were just too many questions out there, and it ended up becoming a big showdown between the publisher and the editor and the authors of that book. And ultimately, they decided to go without the non-commercial restriction, or a restriction on commercial use. And that was, but that very showdown happened there, where we weren't talking about Bertelsmann or Time Warner doing the capture. We were just talking about the basic things that a university press could and could not do with the work. And I think that's it comes from a naivete about just how essential certain commercial activities are to the distribution of cultural works. And, in the case of many people, just wishing it weren't so, but wishing it weren't so doesn't necessarily solve a problem.
Well, artists seem to think that commerce is something other people do. They don't seem to realize that that's something they do. And so it's like, oh, I'm not getting any money. Oh, it's like, well, you want money, that means commerce, right? Like, you should be entitled to get money also. You shouldn't have to go through an expensive licensing process in order to get money. You should be able to build and be an artist and get paid for your work, for the contribution you put in it. It's notable. I mean, it's crucial. This is actually really where Creative Commons really diverges from free software. Commerce is a crucial part of the free software ecosystem. You have to be free to sell stuff that builds on free software. And the fact that so many, the most popular Creative Commons licenses don't allow that are creating a very different cultural ecosystem.
Right. Well, you look as though with Mimi and Eunice, you are trying to cobble together a fix for that in a way, and I'd like to talk about the copy heart in a minute after we thank another sponsor. Before we go to that, though, there has been a clamor, Nina, in the IRC for where people can find your song and freely share it and build upon it.
Well, you can copy a recording of this, but let's see, I have a more professional recording by Bliss Blood that is collaborating with me. I'm working on it. It's the next minute meme, and just for now, you're just going to have to copy the one on this podcast.
Okay, great. Well, send me the link when it's available, and I'll put it in the show notes for this podcast. And before we go on, I do want to talk about your decisions about Netflix, Nina, and I want to talk about the copy heart and some other considerations about YouTube and music. But before we get to that, I do want to thank our other sponsor, MailRoute. MailRoute is an excellent service for users of any size. You can be a single user, you can be 50,000 users. It's a secure hosted service that offers virus and spam for any size of company. Whether you want to eliminate viruses and spam, reduce the load on your email server, lower your costs, make your email usable again, it does all that for you. A typical MailRoute customer sees a 95% reduction in their inbound email volume with virtually no false positives, folks. It's a really, really effective product. Leo Laporte loves MailRoute. He's been using the service for his domains for more than 6 years, and MailRoute has been the top choice of his for spam and virus filtering all along. And Tom Merritt started using MailRoute. Now he can use his email domains that he'd given up on being able to use as hopeless. Tom Johnson, the founder and CEO of MailRoute, started one of the very first companies in this market back in 1998, FrontBridge. FrontBridge was acquired by Microsoft in 2005 and is still offered as the Microsoft Exchange Hosted Services line. Tom wasn't done, though, and he had too many good ideas that he couldn't stand to see go to waste. So he started MailRoute. This is his next generation service for filtering email with a level of accuracy and a price that's unmatchable. And it's really simple to use. All you do, there's no hardware or software to sign up to install. You just sign up with MailRoute, and then you change the MX records for your domain to start your mail flowing through them. They do all the work for you from there. So visit mailroute.info to sign up, and as a TWiL listener, you'll receive 10% off the life of your account. Small business accounts start at $2 per user per month for 10 users. And because of the demand from folks who listen to this and the other Twitch shows, MailRoute has added a new service for individual users as well, less than $30 per user per year for single users. So visit mailroute.info and sign up with the email filtering service that Tom and Leo use and love. Thank you so much, MailRoute, for your support. Let's see, Nina, let's talk about the copy heart. And what I love the most about it, I think, is you in your FAQ for it. First of all, it's just a little, instead of a C with a circle around it, it's a heart that you can put by copyrighted works that says that this work is basically free to share and use however you would like.
It says copying. Oh, am I echoing?
Oh.
It
No,
says
you're good.
copying. Okay, good. Copying is an act of love. Please copy and share.
There we go. And my favorite thing in the FAQ is someone once asked you, well, is the copy hard enforceable? And you said, I don't know. Why don't you copy hard a work, then find someone who's using it, and then try and sue them and see how well you do.
Yeah, it's open for experimentation.
I'd love to see that too. Tell us the story of the copy hard. Is this your own creation?
Wow, I hate to claim things as my own creation because I am merely a fish swimming in a cultural sea. But I was getting frustrated with people referring to the share-alike license I used on Sita Sings the Blues as a Creative Commons license. They just would say, oh, she used a Creative Commons license. That means you can use it for anything except commercial purposes. And I was like, no, it's a share-alike license. So I started saying share-alike license, and people would get this blank look. I don't know. I just... Oh, I know what else it is. I was giving a talk at a manga convention about copyright. I do a lot of talks, and the questions I get from the audiences show that even when they've studied the Creative Commons website and everything, they still don't understand. I've talked to so many artists who use Creative Commons licenses, and they don't even know what license they chose, and they don't know what it means. They're not even aware that there are all these differences. So there's been great efforts at education, but they're not trickling down to the average user. And I was like, okay, how am I going to reach the average user? Of course, for lawyers, I want to use a license. So any lawyer that sees this thing, I want them to know that it's under a share-alike license. But what do I do for the average person that doesn't, that's just not going to take the time to educate themselves from top to bottom about copyright law? And I thought, I'll just try this. I'll just try putting a little message on it that has nothing to do with copyright law itself, that doesn't legitimize copyright law, doesn't build on copyright law. It's like, imagine a post-copyright world, to just like encourage people to think outside of the law, which, the law that I don't favor in any way. I must admit, I'm just going to confess that. I know a lot of people say, like, I think we
did understand. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
That's come through loud and clear.
So I just thought, well, what's a common symbol? Oh, here's this little heart symbol that, is available, and just write this message and see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. It doesn't really matter what's going to happen. On the FAQ for it, I did point out that there are lots of other symbols where there's no trademark of them. I mean, I'm never going to trademark a heart, but nobody's ever trademarked the cross. No one's trademarked Star of David or the peace sign, but we all know what those things mean. So it seems like, I guess I just wanted to step outside of the law. Like, is there any way I can share my work without relying on lawyers? Much as I love you lawyers, I just think that things have gotten a little bit out of control, and there's got to be a way for artists to reach audiences and share without involving the law at all. That's what Copy Heart was an attempt to do.
Right. Last point on Sita Sing the Blues is, I understand that the film has done so well that you were approached by Netflix as a distribution channel, and what a wonderful distribution channel for so many works. But you were forced, and was it your license that constrained you to do this, to turn them down? What was the reason there?
A couple things. One is that Netflix is a distribution channel for Sita Sings the Blues. They distribute the DVDs, and that's great. Right. And I really like Netflix. The issue came with their video-on-demand system, which relies heavily, if not entirely, on DRM. And from the beginning, I did not I'm not going to endorse any DRM on Cetus Thinks the Blues. For those who don't know, DRM stands for either Digital Restrictions Management or Digital Rights Management. It's bad code that disables your computer from doing the one thing computers naturally do, which is copy. So I wasn't going to endorse that. Now, the whole licensing model with Cetus Thinks the Blues is I don't get paid to license it. Everybody already has the rights. What I negotiate is my endorsement. And there's something called the Creator Endorsed Mark. Check it out on questioncopyright.org. It's a really brilliant alternative to copyright and attribution rights and all of these things. So legally, I don't really even know if the share-alike license prohibits putting DRM on the film. That's not clear. What is clear is that I'm not going to endorse anything that puts DRM on the film. So Netflix may still be able to stream Cetus Thinks the Blues. They just have to do it without my endorsement. And yeah, that's all I withheld was my endorsement. I'm just not going to endorse DRM. That's it. So no streaming Cetus Thinks the Blues on Netflix. I did ask them over and over again, is there any way you can have this go through your system without DRM? And their system's just not set up for it. It's got DRM, from top to bottom. There's no DRM-free channel in their streaming system, and I can only hope that someday there will be, or that somebody else will offer such a thing.
Right. This is a problem that a lot of artists have had with not just Netflix, but other distribution channels too, such as the Kindle or other media. Siva, do you see any solution to this? And let me just add as a footnote, it's hard for me to wrap my head around DRM associated with streaming. So maybe you can elaborate on that too.
The DRM issue that was, it was so hot and burning 6 years ago, seems to be less crucial now. In a sense, look, streaming is going to have some sort of engineered exclusivity built into it, so you can't tap a stream. And when you're signed up for Netflix, you sign up for Netflix, and hacking that stream is difficult to do, not impossible. That's not classic DRM in the sense that it's not the way that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, Section 1201, describes it. It's a device or a technology that prevents access to copyrighted materials. That implies fixed and stable, right? Because that law was written for the DVD. It was written about the DVD, essentially, right? Right? So in a post-DVD world, things are a bit different. We've already seen that Amazon's given up on it. Most of the music industry has given up on it. Interestingly, Amazon's given up on it for music, but not for books. Strangely, and that Apple's given up on it for the most part as well. Again, for music, not for video. So, what we're finding is it's less of a burning issue because a lot of these content providers are coming to the realization that it doesn't actually solve the problem they thought it would solve. In the early days of the iPod, it made sense because it tethered the iTunes store material to this device, and Steve Jobs got to sell you razors and blades that couldn't work with any other razors or blades. Once he established the dominance in the player field, and he knew that it was all going to be about phones in the future, he let that go. So, I don't know. I can't imagine in the next few years people will think that technological controls are going to be any sort of panacea that limits the distribution of copyrighted material, but they are, I think, going to continue to see it as an effort to tether content to devices, merely to try to double dip on the revenue. It's becoming less of an ideological thing and more of an engineering thing, if that makes any sense.
I wish I shared your optimism. That would be great. I hope you're right. I really do, because I really want this film out on as many channels as possible. And it seems like every new channel for films, every new platform for films has DRM all over it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like, you just can't get these people to imagine a world without it yet. At least in the video world, we got that. The music world, they just enough failure over the years, enough money blown away on firms that were supposed to come up with the unhackable DRM, enough disasters and bad headlines that rated with it. But in the video world, they're just not there yet, and right now it's still a battle over formats, And so even if that format is Blu-ray versus standard DVD, or that format is one codec for streaming versus another codec for streaming, and so enforcing DRM is really about making sure that your format wins in the long run. So it's not necessarily optimism. I don't think it's going away anytime soon in that world, because until one codec wins or one format wins, and they realize that, well, we won. I mean, that's what Steve Jobs did. He basically declared victory and thus could declare peace. But that hasn't happened. It's not likely to happen in the video world. The downside of that is we get the one big vendor, and that might be Netflix, and it might be something else. It might even be Amazon for all that stuff, and that has its own problems, even if we get rid of the DRM problem.
All right, well, we've talked a lot about commerce today. We've talked a lot about Google, and here's a story that incorporates both those things. YouTube came out and told Evolver.fm that it thinks its rights holder compensation system is going to be paying people as much for free videos that are freely available on YouTube. It's going to pay the content holders as much as they would make if those same works were available in a paid service such as iTunes. Evan, did you check this out, and what do you think?
I did, and I mean, it seems to be a purely economic question here, kind of a matter of scale with numbers of views, drawing attention to things that play very well into kind of the Mike Masnick philosophy of, drawing attention to a work and giving people a reason to buy. Connect with fans plus reason to buy is his formula for all of this. So it's nice to see something kind of playing into that and giving a reality to that. And, if this is how the speculation about this is going to go, let's see how it goes and have positive aspirations for it.
What do you think, Siva? YouTube's getting pretty good at its rights holder compensation system, but it's not a perfect world. You have a lot of instances where there might actually be fair use involved in what's being uploaded, or there might be permission involved that's not going to come through simply by a machine reading what's been uploaded and running it against an IP filtering system. So it's not perfect, but it's getting better. And do you think that we're a long way away from the day when someone like Nina can decide to skip all the $70,000 worth of legal hurdles she underwent in releasing her film the way she did, and simply upload it and let Google take care of asking the rights holders, okay, are you good with this? And do you want it taken down, or do you want to be paid?
But remember, that's just a transfer of the need to come up with the 70,000 from the artist to the vendor or distributor. And Google would have to have an incentive to do that, not just for her film, but for every other film or video that encounters similar problems. Does Google have that incentive? Well, the paradox here is that because Google has so much content, it need not care about any particular example, which is why it goes through this very sort of soulless automatic system of, first, if it's challenged on copyright grounds, it takes it down and gives you, they give you a link that you can complain about, but no guarantee when a human being is going to review it and how comfortable they're going to be with that review. It's a soulless cold system because it's so big and so successful. If Google were starting out with, or YouTube were starting out, and they desperately needed quality material which that was never its goal anyway, to make it, then maybe it might have an incentive to enable and encourage high quality work to survive in the system. But, the bigger that YouTube gets, the less Google has to care about any one of us as either viewers or creators.
You know what I wish YouTube had was a donate button for artists who upload work. That would just solve so many problems. You like this? Click donate. They don't have it.
Right, in that same article discussing...
I'm going to write to them and suggest that, actually.
Please do.
I'm going to write to the people. I know some people at YouTube. I'm going to write to them and suggest that. I'm sure other people have suggested it, but I'd be interested to know why they wouldn't do that.
I'm just going to leave a comment on a video because that's the way it'll really get seen, in the stream of comments on YouTube.
In fact, report the video as inappropriate because it doesn't have a donate button, and then see it get taken down, and then create a furor.
Yeah. Well, back to commerce, we're all talking about the rights holders, these big corporations that own everything, they must be compensated. We're not even thinking about the people that put the creative work into whatever video they uploaded that built on that. We're just they don't deserve anything. And I think, they do deserve something, actually. Put a donate button there.
Right. And in a lot of the Wired.com coverage I've read of YouTube and its content ID system, there's this assumption that people all the uploader wants is to have their video remain there. But of course, there are a whole host of other concerns, such as compensation would be a nice thing for whatever. Yeah,
I should also say that their ad thing, because I use the Masnik Connect with Fans model. I mean, I was doing that before I heard it was named that. I actually click away from videos that have ads on them. And so for me, putting ads, being part of that revenue system would actually damage, I think, my relationship with fans, which I don't want to do.
Right. Well, when we have law professors on, I like to do a couple of law professor exam questions whenever possible, law school exam questions. I have one that came in from one of our listeners named David, who, and this is the kind of thing that constantly comes up in the music context. We also have another one that's in our discussion points. First one, let's go to David. I have hundreds of cassettes that I have converted to MP3s, which I think are not subject to the DMCA. Can I sell the cassettes and still keep the MP3s? What do you think, Siva?
I would just, DMCA, don't worry about DMCA. Selling copies of other people's copyrighted works is going to get you in trouble. So don't worry about the format. Don't worry about the DMCA. Don't worry about DRM. The fact is, if it's copyrighted works and you're trying to sell them, that's a problem.
For sale, though?
I'm sorry?
For sale doctrine, though, in this particular example? He's got hundreds of cassettes and wants to sell them if he, makes sense.
Then I misunderstood the example. I didn't realize that he's selling the originals.
Yeah, selling the cassettes.
Bought. Oh, yeah, that's no problem at all. Jeez, I'm too slow to follow even the example that you're doing. I'm sorry. Yeah, right. So yeah, if you bought these cassettes, you can sell them on the used market, no problem at all with that.
But the keeping of the MP3s, I guess, is the
keeping of the MP3s is a private, non-commercial copying that no one need ever know about, as long as you don't distribute them publicly. And so no one's ever going to sue you because they're never going to find out about it. So,
but just because they don't sue him, does that make it legal?
In a way, yes, because we're talking about civil law. It's a civil question, and in a civil question, what really matters is whether you get sued. Private non-commercial copying has been legitimated by a number of courts in a number of different ways, including the most notably the Sony Betamax case. So as long as you have lawfully acquired the material in the first place, and you're making a copy for your own use, and you're not publicly distributing it, there's certainly, I know of no case where that has been a problem, and there are a good number of cases that have where courts have basically said that sort of copying is allowed.
Got it. Okay,
now, the MPA and the RIA may disagree with me, but in fact, they do disagree.
Well, that's always
they don't have cases on their side. They just have public relations agents saying that.
Exactly. All right. So in looking around, investigating a little further the music that was in Nina's film, I found a little clip on YouTube of Ethel Waters doing Am I Blue, and one of the numbers in Nina's film by Annette Hanshaw in the movie. And in the comments no one reads, to the YouTube clip, there is someone begging, do you have an MP3 copy of this rendition of Am I Blue? This is the best one I can find, but no one has it in downloadable form. And then someone gives her some instructions on downloading into Real Player and converting into MP3. Well, Mike Masnick, who we've mentioned a couple of times today, had a story about a company called MP3 Rocket that wants to make that a lot easier. And what they're doing is changing their business model to provide MP3s of YouTube videos. And the question is that going to be legal? Evan, why don't you take the first crack at this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is, there was a service called Vixie or something like that that'd been around for a while that's allowed this to be done for some time, and there is that kind of wrinkle with this with what's that amendment to the Copyright Act, the Home Audio Recording Act or something, that amendment that appears to ratify the ability or to somehow say that it's okay to record music off of the radio for your home non-commercial private use and all of that stuff. So to me, this falls very closely in line with what we were talking about earlier about just, don't get caught doing this, and it essentially rises to the level, or it doesn't rise to the level of not being unlawful if it's essentially no harm, no foul, or at least no harm that anybody knows with all of this. So,
but if you're MP3 Rocket, you're going to get caught doing it. It's your business model.
Great. I'm glad you reminded me of what the real issue is. It's a Grokster problem then, to me, it sounds like, because there's plenty of stuff out there on YouTube that is in the public domain or, would be able to be recorded and copied without the ire of the rights holder. So it's all going to depend on how the platform puts itself forward, declares what its object is, to use the nomenclature of the Grokster opinion. That's going to really determine that question of whether they should be secondarily liable for the conduct of their users. There's going to be plenty of instances where there is no direct infringement at the bottom layer, the user layer. So that has to be that has to be promoted so that is the actual main objective, to facilitate and foster that direct infringement. So that's where the interesting discussion for what the provider's liability is.
Right, and ERTR 048 in IRC pointed me toward YouTube-mp3.org, which apparently is attempting to avoid the Grokster problem by not charging anything for the service, but it's an MP3 conversion service. If you were charging for it, Siva, what do you think?
Well, obviously charging for it is a big problem, but not charging for it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I mean, the Grokster decision hinged on the very fact that you were creating a technology that induced people to copy.
Others. Yeah.
Right, induced others to copy. So it was actually a marketing problem. I mean, that was such a weirdly decided case. It was basically based on how you market things. So remember back in those days, when you bought a new iPod, it had a little sticker on the back that said, "Don't copy music," even though the drive was big enough that you couldn't possibly buy all the music from iTunes and still fill up the the iPod. So, it really one of the weird things about copyright is it really is all about who you decide to anger, and who you decide to generate a suit from. You see my dog in the back. She's getting bored with this conversation. Unfortunately, she's not very much into copyright. She should be grateful though. Copyright bought you this nice house. Anyway, that really is one of the absurd things. When the Grokster decision was being decided, I wrote an amicus brief in which I made the point that basically what peer-to-peer services do is no different from what search engines do. In fact, less than what search engines do. The difference between what Google does and what Grokster did is that Google actually makes copies of copyrighted material for its indexes, whereas Grokster didn't even do that. Grokster just resolved a search query for you and didn't actually do any copying for you. And so, I mean, these distinctions are so arbitrary, and the dealing with these distribution systems is so recent that not only have we not figured out all of our social norms and so forth for dealing with these, and we don't even have a good vocabulary for dealing with these, but the law has basically just been scrambling for ways to protect incumbents in the last 15 years of suits. So I don't think very much is settled in copyright law, and I think that we're going to see a bunch more interesting cases over the next 15 years before we get any sort of stable environment in which people can confidently create material and confidently create devices and technologies.
All right. Well, we have a tip of the week for you. I guess that YouTube-mp3.com or .org is a nice tip, to the extent that it's able to stay up and functioning, and to the extent that you would like to convert YouTube videos to MP3 format.
Be careful not to induce anyone to infringe here, saying, don't click on that link because you're going to do.
Yes, it's simply, I'm not inducing or suggesting, I'm just mentioning it's out there. But I do have another tip for us, and it's just basically to make you laugh, although there is an underlying framework for the discussion that is more serious, and that is something we've talked about before on the show, and it has to do with the fact that all of our technology and web connectedness makes it more and more difficult to have legal disputes in private, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There is a link in our discussion points to a discussion by Eugene Volokh, who was challenged about his own personal journalistic / professorial / blogger ethics in publishing a demand letter to an ISP from Brian Leiter, who is another law professor, I guess, down in Texas, who had a problem
he's in
with
Chicago
someone.
now. He moved to Chicago. Yeah.
Okay, so he had a problem with someone who was basically saying not nice things and had put up a site that incorporated his name in the URL for the site. So he was writing to the ISP to have that taken down, and Eugene Volokh published the letter and wanted to have some legal discussion about the merits of the claims that were being made, whether there was a legal basis for taking down the site or not, based on what was being asserted, and question the ethics of litigating in public this way, or causing someone else to in this particular instance. So there's a more serious example. A more lighthearted example is going all the way back to 1974. And if you haven't already gotten this in your email, I've gotten it a couple of times now. Somehow this exchange from the 70s is now making the rounds through various sites, and one of those email viral, pass it on, this one's actually funny kind of things. It was a letter on a lawyer's, you know what, this is such a pet peeve of mine, when lawyers have personal beefs and they use their own letterhead to air their personal grievance. That's what this guy was doing. He had attended a game at Cleveland Stadium, and there were paper airplanes flying around. The guy must have been, great. Yeah, he must have been a personal injury lawyer, because he wrote to the Browns and complained about this.
1974, right?
Yes, November 18, 1974, and said, pointed out the risks of injury. Someone could get poked in the eye, kind of thing. Sounds like a Christmas story. Please be advised that since you are in a position to control or terminate such action on the part of fans, I will hold you responsible for any injury sustained by any person in my party attending one of your sporting events. It is hoped that this disrespectful and possibly dangerous activity will be terminated. And so a young lawyer representing the Cleveland Stadium fired off a response. It is 3 lines in length. It says, "Dear Mr. Cox, attached is a letter that we received on November 19, 1974. I feel that you should be aware that some a-hole is signing your name to stupid letters. Very truly yours, Cleveland Stadium Corp." You read on Snopes, they point to a Cleveland Plain Dealer article that actually went and resurrected these two guys and confirmed, yes, indeed, this exchange happened. And Mr. Bailey here, the succinct and clever lawyer for the Cleveland Stadium, said, yeah, I didn't actually vet that, and I got in trouble when I sent it out. But, tip of the week, if you need to respond to a demand letter, this is just a wonderful model to follow. Evan, do you agree?
Yeah, it is really clever. And, it's, if you do the math, I mean, these guys would have been really young when this happened, like late 20s, early 30s, writing these letters back and forth. And, it's just really satisfying to see a response that's a zinger towards such an irritating letter in the first place. It's kind of like, oh, I just got through with my torts class, so I'm the smartest person in the world, and I'm going to go around telling people how it is. So there's a wonderful kind of kind of a Zen quality to which there's a directness that's which with this silliness is dispensed with. I like it.
Me too. Siva, do you advocate this sort of advocacy in your law school classes?
I advocate all sorts of humor in any sort of situation. I do want to point out that I, even though I teach at a law school, I never went to law school. The first law class I ever went to was my own.
Good for you. That's the way to do it. Just circumvent the whole 3 years of torture.
I'm the only law professor who gets to be irresponsible enough to tell law students that they should do stuff like that, right? So, I've no license to be removed if things go horribly wrong. But that's one of the sort of cultural problems we have now is that it's all too easy to scare somebody with something that sounds like a legal threat, and that is fortunately this happened in 1974 when maybe the Browns stadium only got 2 or 3 such letters in a year. I guarantee you now they get hundreds of them about all kinds of stupid stuff all the time, to the point where it's no longer even funny to respond that way. Letters like that are all too common about all sorts of things. I do want to point out, I quickly had tweeted about Nina's suggestion that YouTube have a donate button for artists, and someone responded that in fact they do, but this is great because this goes right to one of Nina's other points. They do have a donate button system, but only if you are a nonprofit registered with YouTube Nonprofits. So someone who actually wants to make money creating work, which was the point of Nina's example, is still out. But a nonprofit, you can do the donate button.
All right, Google, fix this for us, please. It's an issue. All right.
Yeah,
well,
I want to just, before our time runs out, I want to commend Siva. I wrote down something you said, which I think sums up copyright so well. To your dog, quote, "Copyright bought you this nice house."
Or criticism of copyright, even better. So yeah,
that's it just sums it up. Praise, criticism, whatever. That's in a nutshell.
Great.
Well, it also bought us this wonderful show that I have so enjoyed thoroughly the whole time. You guys have been an awesome panel. I know that everyone who's listening can not help but agree with me. Nina Paley, it's a pleasure to finally get you on TWiL.
Thank you so much for having me.
Namaste. And I so enjoyed watching your film, and encourage everybody to go do that at SitaSingsTheBlue.com.
Sita Sings the Blues, plural.
Blues, I'm sorry. Sita Sings the Blues. And Mimi and Eunice is hysterical. So,
thank you. I'm so gratified.
Yes, it's really, really wonderful. And of course, you can copy and share it around as you'd like. And
MimiandEunice.com.
Yes. Thanks so much, Nina, and have a wonderful weekend, and hope to chat with you again soon.
Thank you.
Siva, wonderful too to finally have you on the show, and I'm really enjoying your book. Folks, get out there and read about how we have all been Googleized and what we can do about it. The Googleization of Everything is Siva's new book, and it's awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
This was a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
All right, I'd love to. Evan, we are just blessed as usual.
Yes. Yes, this was a great show to listen to. Just and it's one of those where there's going to be like a mental kind of days going around, kind of recovering from this show. It's a wonderful time. So really enjoyed being here. Me
too. And folks, definitely check out Evan after the show at internetcases.com. He's at internetcases on Twitter. Siva, you are at Siva Vaid, V-A-I-D, on Twitter. Is that right? And
That's
Nina
exactly.
is Nina Paley on Twitter. So go out and follow them after the show, too. And also after the show, we post our pre-show questions for next week on Facebook. We love to get your comments and thoughts there as we get ready for the show. That's at facebook.com/thisweekinlaw. We record every Friday at 11 o'clock in the Pacific time zone. That would be 1 Central, 2 Eastern, and 1900 at this time of year UTC. Join us here at live.twit.tv to watch while we record, or join us in the chat, or do both at irc.twit.tv, pound Twit Live in your chat client. And we will see you next week for a double dose of shows. Actually, we're going to record 2 next Friday. So I hope you're in the mood for a lot of TWiL, because we always are. And we'll talk to you then. Take care.